Welcome, friends, to another Warhammer 40k video. As wars change and evolve, certain units that might have been at the forefront are no longer relevant. Those who once fought valiantly for their ruler are not called to war, and it is with two of these units we start today. Forces left on Earth or elsewhere who are brought back into the war and must fight again with the opening of the Great Rift. More on that as we go. Let's get straight into it. The Adaptes Custodes are peerless warriors and guardians of the Emperor of Mankind. They have familial ties to him, being his first created children, followed by the Thunder Warriors and the Space Marines. The Emperor gave the Adaptes Custodes life with his gene craft. They then followed their father through every conflict until one day they failed him. The Emperor of Mankind fell, fighting a later generation of his genetic sons, and he was then placed on the Golden Throne, a life support mechanism for their once great liege. There he sits, broken in body, but still using his vast psychic power to beam out a beacon, the Astronomicon. Why tell you all this, you might be thinking? To show the Adaptes Custodes have links to their fallen lord. After his death, they still continue their protection, and it is performing these duties that we meet Valerian. He guards the outer walls of the Emperor's palace. The forces of chaos, led by one of the Emperor's genetic sons, have managed to open the Great Rift, called the Cicatrix Maledictum. It splits mankind's empire in half, making it harder to travel in the warp, and we see its effects also on Earth. The warp, or the immaterium, is an underbelly to the material universe, a place of pure psychic energy where demons from mankind's nightmares walk. It was with the effects of the warp's tides hitting Earth that the routines of the Adaptes Custodes are rattled by the fading of their father's beacon, and we'll go straight to the books for this next bit, their reaction to it. The Astronomicon was more than the beacon by which our starships sailed. It was the single most significant marker of the Emperor's continued presence amongst us. We might hope for mystical signs from time to time, or inspiration from the tarot, but in truth, the greatest proof that our master still held sway against the tides of unreason was the light. He guided through the Empyrean. While that endured, he endured. If that failed, we would know that he had failed. This also brings change for a forgotten militant order called the Sisters of Silence. Much of the power of their enemies is in their psychic abilities, and the Sisterhood, or the Anathema Psychana, cast no soul shadow in the warp, which means their minds are immune to attack from psychic abilities, and they can, what I would term as, dampen another's psychic abilities. One of them is called Alea. She is impacted by the widening of the hole in the warp. It leads her to being called back to where they had been long absent, to stand by the Emperor once more, on Terra. There, with the warp influence still strong, she fights with Valerian. The sisters came in with a fury. Alea ran through the warp demons, and her and the sisters linked up with the Emperor's other forgotten fighters. After that, we were fighting together, sliding in amongst one another, dancing and parrying and interweaving as if born to it. The sisters directing their null effect from the shadow of our blades. They covered for each other, leaving slaughter in their wake. As they break through the creatures of the warp, they find something greater to fight. It reared high into the blood rainstorm, its wings lashing like the sails of some ancient galleon, its cloven hooves sunk deep into the rockcrete with every step, breaking the earth into fresh plumes of flames. It was a bloodthirster, a great demon, filled with the savagery of war. The Null Maidens dampen and slow it, and Alea cuts through its leg with her great blade, and then Valerian drove his spear point first through the demon's throat, powering it with both arms until it almost disappeared into a mire of burning, bubbling ichor. They later leave Terra, which was a rare event for the Custodes, who have been so focused on protecting their liege. And there, Out in space, they combat the Black Legion's forces of chaos. They were once Space Marines, the Emperor's creations that turned against him. So once again, we have sons against sons, generations, you could also say. The Eldar, the Custodes, against the younger. The Black Legion were also the ones that had taken out Alia's sisters. Valerian and Alia boarded a cruiser and fought through it to prevent the ship dropping a shard Akkadian pylon on the planet. They were what had prevented the Great Rift opening by emitting an anti-psychic field, thus stopping travel through the warp in their proximity. If it was dropped, this would isolate Terra for attack by nearby forces, and more importantly, prevent new crusades leaving Terra to help the divided empire of humanity. The book tells us we were dying. There were fewer than 20 of us left by then, clustered around that burned out mooring, our backs to one another and fighting hard. Dozens more legionnaires crashed down from the fully extended gantries, and beyond them came dozens more. The tide was never ending, a storm surge that would overwhelm us sooner or later, no matter how many of them we slew first. Hold fast, anathema, Valerian told Alia, his spear whirling around him, those glorious golden parabolas. This is where it ends. Let us make it a stand for the ages. The next part is first person from Alia's perspective. This was a new age, I thought then. We had lived to see it dawn and had fought for its survival. Death in that cause was not a tragedy, it was a privilege. So I spoke, I did it. What use were vows then? They had never helped me before. By his will alone, I said out loud, referring to the Emperor of course, fighting hard, relishing my final words as they slipped from my lips. And they succeeded. Alia and Valerian were brought back wounded but alive. The piles of bodies around the bulkhead and the smashed ruins of the rock crete beyond were testament to their extraordinary resilience. So the 13th Black Crusade and the opening of the Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, had changed the lives of these warriors, and they would be more active in the new era, the Indomitus Crusade. I hope you enjoyed the fight of the Custodes and the Anathema Psychana, and so now I turn things over to you. Where do you see the newly started crusade going? Will the Great Rift cause more upheaval for man's Imperium? Likely, I think. Have you fought a greater demon at the gates to the Emperor's palace? Comment down below.